Mom left me pregnant and homeless for 4 years. Now my mom wants back in my daughter's life after knowing who the dad is, so my mom kicked me out when I was pregnant at 22. Gave me exactly 2 hours to pack my stuff and get out. And now, for years later, she wants back into our lives. Wanna know why? Because she found out who my daughter's father is. And suddenly, I'm worth her time again. But let me tell you the whole story, because it gets worse before it gets better. The day everything changed, I was 22 years old when I told my mom I was pregnant. I'll never forget the look on her face. Not concern, not sympathy, just disgust. She gave me 2 hours. 2 hours to pack whatever I could fit into garbage bags and leave. She said I could deal with the consequences of my choices like an adult. And when those 2 hours were up, she changed the locks while I sat on the front step with 2 trash bags full of clothes and absolutely nowhere to go. The father was a guy named Alex. We'd met at a college freshman orientation party. He was visiting from Switzerland, just there for a week. It was a one-night thing. I didn't even know his last name. Never saw him again after that night. I had no way to contact him. No phone number, no idea what school he went to back home. Nothing. I dropped out of college that semester, moved into a homeless shelter, had my daughter, Sophie, in a county hospital with nobody there. Just me, alone, while my mom told everyone in the family that I'd run off to Vegas to become a stripper. 4 years of hell, those 4 years were the hardest of my life. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It was hell. I worked as a waitress at a dive restaurant where customers thought it was okay to grab my ass for $3 tips. I lived in a studio apartment with black mold growing in the corners and cockroaches everywhere. Sophie slept in a dresser drawer for the first 6 months because I couldn't afford a crib. We were on food stamps. WIC. I walked 4 miles to work when the bus schedule didn't line up with my shift. For miles. In the dark. Because I had no other choice. And you know what the worst part was? My mom lived 25 minutes away in her nice 4-bedroom house. She never called, never visited. She told the entire family I was dead. Actually told people I had died. My younger sister Amanda would sneak out to meet me at parks sometimes, bringing Sophie hand-me-down clothes. But she was too scared to do more. Mom had threatened to cut her off financially if she helped me. But I made it work. I got my GED online while Sophie slept. Started taking community college classes when she turned 3. Got better waitressing jobs. Saved every penny I could. And moved us into a safer apartment. Sophie was amazing. Smart, funny. She was reading by age 4 and doing basic math before kindergarten. Everything I did was for her. Every single decision, every sacrifice, every mile I walked in the dark. All for her. When everything changed last month, a man walked into my restaurant. Expensive suit, Swiss accent. He stared at me for a full minute before finally asking if I'd attended State University 4 years ago. My heart stopped. Alex wasn't Alex. His real name was Christopher Bennett, and his family owned a chain of luxury hotels across Europe. He'd been looking for me for 3 years, hired private investigators, searched social media, spent thousands trying to find the girl he'd spent one night with because he couldn't stop thinking about me. His cousin had found my photo in an old university orientation archive, and that's how he tracked me down. I showed him Sophie's picture. Right there in the restaurant, he broke down crying. He told me his father had been pressuring him to marry some socialite back in Switzerland. He'd refused. Kept thinking about the American girl who drunkenly quoted Shakespeare and laughed at his terrible jokes. He'd wanted to find me for years. He met Sophie the next week, set up a trust fund for her, bought us a house, wrote me a check for $8,000 a month to cover 4 years of back child support he didn't even know he owed. His family flew up from Switzerland and showered Sophie with love and presents. For the first time in 4 years, I could breathe. We were going to be okay. And then my mom showed up. That's when my mother appeared. She showed up at my new house with flowers and tears. Said she'd made a mistake. Said she missed us. Family should forgive, right? Neighbors forgive. But I knew what had really happened. She'd seen the Mercedes in my driveway, the Swiss license plates, the delivery trucks from high-end stores bringing furniture. She'd done her research, found out who Christopher was, found out how much his family was worth. And suddenly, Sophie had value to her. Suddenly, we were worth her time. She wanted to be involved, wanted to help plan Sophie's 6th birthday party. Maybe in Switzerland, she suggested. She'd always wanted to see Geneva. I let her in, let her talk. She went on about second chances, how I was young and didn't understand, how she'd only wanted what was best for me. Then Christopher walked in from the kitchen. He'd heard everything. The confrontation, my mom's face lit up when she saw him. She extended her hand with this huge smile, gushing about her beautiful granddaughter. Christopher looked at her hand like it was covered in sewage. "You're the woman who threw out your pregnant daughter," he said. My mom stammered something about tough, love, and responsibility. Christopher pulled out his phone and showed her something. Her face went completely white. "This is a police report from the shelter where your daughter spent her first month homeless," he said. "She was logged as an abandoned minor. She was 7 months pregnant when she applied for emergency housing. This hospital report shows she gave birth alone, listed as indigent. Would you like me to continue?" My mom tried to explain, but Christopher cut her off. He swiped to another screen. "The shelter intake form," he said quietly, but his voice was sharp. "Your daughter's name at the top. Red checkbox for abandoned minor." My mom started to speak, but Christopher asked if she wanted him to go through the rest of his investigator's 4 years of paperwork. I stood there, frozen in the kitchen doorway, gripping the frame, watching her try to make excuses. She said she didn't understand how bad it was. Thought I'd figure it out. She was scared. She was angry. Christopher kept showing documents, medical records, social service reports, like he was presenting evidence in court. Tears mixed with my mom's foundation, which she'd so carefully applied before coming here. She turned to me, trembling, said she'd been so afraid, made a terrible mistake, thought about me every day. I stepped back before she could touch me. "Leave," I said. My voice was calm, steady. Christopher stood beside me as I opened the front door. Didn't say a word, just supported me. My mom stood in the middle of my living room looking shocked. She asked if we could talk, if she could explain. I held the door open. My heart was racing so loud I thought everyone could hear it, but my hand didn't shake on the doorknob. She picked up her purse and flowers and walked past me with her head down, crying. I watched her get in her car and drive away. Then I closed the door and leaned against it, my legs shaking. Taking legal action, Christopher and I sat at the kitchen table after I checked that Sophie was still sleeping upstairs. He apologized for ambushing me with the documents. He said when he'd hired investigators to find me, he'd had them gather everything. He'd saved my entire survival story in case I ever needed evidence. We talked about what to do next, and he surprised me by suggesting we start with formal paternity confirmation. He wanted everything legal and protected, said Sophie and I deserved that after carrying this burden alone for so long. 3 days later, we met with a lawyer named Jennifer Martinez. Her office had thick carpet and framed degrees on the walls. She was younger than I expected, maybe mid-30s, in a professional suit with a no-nonsense expression. Jennifer explained that Christopher had hired her to represent my interests, not his. She worked for me alone, even though he was paying her fees. It was strange having a lawyer who answered only to me, but it felt safer than I'd imagined. She asked detailed questions about what needed protection and what my biggest concerns were. She explained financial constraints before test results even arrived. Christopher had already put back child support into an escrow account that would release after official paternity confirmation. The house couldn't be taken back. It was in my name with legal protections, purchased outright no matter what happened between us. Page after page of legal language. Jennifer explained each section in plain English, listed every safeguard she'd put in place to protect Sophie and me if something went wrong. My hand cramped from signing, but I was grateful for every word that left no room for ambiguity. Families start spreading lies the next day. Amanda texted me. Mom was calling every relative in the family, telling them I'd kept Sophie hidden out of spite, that I was being cruel by not letting her be a grandmother. That old fear of family isolation hit hard, that feeling of being alone that had defined the last 4 years. But then I reminded myself that most of these relatives thought I was a Vegas stripper anyway. They never reached out when I needed help. That evening, I sat on Sophie's bed with her. She had her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. I told her simply that a friend I'd known from before she was born wanted to meet her. A friend from Europe. I promised we'd take our time figuring out if he was nice. I didn't call him her father. Nothing was proven yet, and I wouldn't make promises I couldn't keep. Sophie nodded seriously and asked if the friend liked cartoons too. I told her I didn't know, but she could ask him questions and decide how she felt. The first meeting, we met at a public park the following Saturday morning. Nice equipment with chips instead of concrete. Christopher brought an inexpensive soccer ball. He asked Sophie about her favorite color and what she liked at playgrounds. She was shy at first, standing partially behind my leg, but curious enough to say she liked purple and swings. I watched them kick the ball around on the grass. Christopher moved slowly, spoke softly. Sophie stopped the ball with her foot and asked why he talked funny, tilting her head. Christopher laughed warmly, said he was from Switzerland where people speak differently, told her they have McDonald's there, but the menu is in French and German. I watched him being honest and age-appropriate. He wasn't promising trips or gifts, just answering her questions like she was a real person whose thoughts mattered. I sat on a bench nearby, close enough to intervene, far enough to let them interact. As they played, Sophie's guard relaxed, but she still looked back at me every few minutes to make sure I was there. Mom's manipulation continues on day 8. My mother left me a voicemail. I listened to it twice before deleting. She said she forgave me for keeping Sophie from her all these years, that she wanted to move forward as a family for Sophie's sake, that she was ready whenever I was. I was furious and exhausted listening to it. Dealing with someone who refuses to understand reality is draining to your core. I didn't call back. I was done jumping into situations that hurt me. The phone stayed silent on my kitchen counter while I made Sophie's lunch, spreading peanut butter just the way she liked. I understood that not responding was better than explaining myself again to someone who wouldn't listen. Researching my rights the next day, after dropping Sophie at kindergarten, I went straight to work for the early shift. On my lunch break, I walked 3 blocks to the public library where I'd studied for my GED when Sophie was a baby. I opened legal information websites about grandparents' rights in our state on a computer terminal in the back corner. The laws were strict, required proof of an established relationship or evidence that denying contact would harm the child. My mom had neither. But the websites warned that determined grandparents could file petitions and drag families through thousands of dollars in court battles. I took notes, wrote down statutes, case names, filing requirements. Gathering knowledge made the fear feel smaller, more manageable, like something I could prepare for. I took phone pictures of relevant pages and texted Jennifer Martinez with a brief message asking if we should be worried. Then I put on my apron and went back to taking dinner orders. Half my thoughts still on legal terms. Legal protection, Jennifer called during my break the next afternoon. She said we should meet to discuss protecting Sophie and me from legal harassment. We needed a paper trail and clear boundaries before my mom could gain any legal ground. We scheduled an appointment for Tuesday at 10 a.m. I swapped shifts with another server to make it work. Friday night, Two regular customers sat in my section, talking loudly enough for me to hear. Something about the Mercedes with Swiss plates outside and whether I was dating royalty. My face burned, but I kept my pen steady on the order pad. Wrote their food orders clearly. My boss noticed me frozen at the kitchen door a few minutes later. Quietly asked if I was okay. Offered to move me to different tables if people were bothering me. I thanked him and said I could handle it, even though my hand shook carrying dishes back to the dining room. Meeting with Amanda Saturday afternoon. Amanda texted asking if we could meet for coffee. I suggested a place across town near the highway where nobody from our neighborhood would recognize us. She was already in a corner booth when I arrived, her college textbook on the table. But her eyes looked sad. We ordered coffee, and she said she wanted to help me. But she was scared Mom would cut her off financially. She was only halfway through her degree and couldn't lose her tuition. I reached across the table and grabbed her hand, told her I understood, that she'd helped us more than anyone by sneaking supplies to us during those terrible years. We both cried quietly and wiped our tears away so other customers wouldn't notice. DNA test Monday morning. We went to a downtown medical facility for the DNA test. Official documentation with chain of custody protocols. It felt more serious than I'd expected. A technician in blue scrubs explained each step and swabbed Sophie's cheek and Christopher's with long cotton sticks. Sophie giggled and asked if they were checking for cavities like at the dentist. Christopher smiled and said something like that. We silently agreed not to tell her what the test was actually for until we had results. Keeping our explanation simple, honest, not frightening. Sophie ran to the car saying the stick tickled, while Christopher and I exchanged relieved looks. Building Legal Protection Week 3 brought another legal meeting. Jennifer spread options across her conference table, like cards in a complicated game. We could file for court-ordered custody arrangements, set privacy measures to prevent this from going viral, send my mother a cease and desist letter if she kept harassing us. The paperwork seemed endless. Stacks of documents requiring signatures and notarization. But the clarity helped. Christopher and I spent 2 hours creating a co-parenting framework. Started with supervised visits, increasing based on Sophie's comfort. Jennifer suggested realistic timelines with holiday and emergency backups. Made it feel manageable instead of overwhelming. We signed everything in good faith while waiting for test results. Official signatures at the bottom of every page. Mom tries to access Sophie at school during my dinner shift Thursday. Sophie's school number appeared on my phone. The principal said calmly but firmly that my mother had come to the office claiming to be the grandmother. She'd asked about pickup procedures. I left work immediately, telling my manager it was an emergency. My hands shook with protective anger as I drove the 6 blocks to school. The principal said they hadn't released any information. Asked if I wanted to file a formal restriction to prevent repeat incidents. I agreed without hesitation. Filled out paperwork at the office while Sophie played on the playground, unaware of what had happened. The next day, Jennifer sent my mother a letter setting a no-contact boundary, warning that any additional attempts to access Sophie or spread family rumors would result in legal action. Signing it made me feel sick with guilt, but oddly strong, like I was choosing safety over peace for the first time in my life. Documenting everything after Sophie went to bed. I started a private journal of every mom-related encounter, voicemail, and incident. Jennifer said it might matter in court, but it also helped me process. Organizing chaos into written facts. Writing down what happened made it harder to doubt myself later. Couldn't be rewritten or dismissed. Christopher wants to spoil Sophie the next afternoon. Christopher brought a European furniture catalog to my apartment. Sticky notes marked a $2,500 dollhouse. He spread the catalog on my kitchen table, pointed to a Victorian-style mansion with working lights and hand-carved details. Said Sophie deserved beautiful things after the years we'd struggled. The price tag made my stomach twist. More than 2 months of my old rent. More than I'd spent on all our apartment furniture combined. I told him it was too much too fast. Sophie was 5 and would be just as happy with a $40 plastic one from Target. He looked confused and hurt, like he didn't understand why throwing money at everything wasn't the solution. After 20 minutes of discussion, I told him experiences mattered more than expensive things. Visiting the children's museum or zoo would create better memories than a playhouse she'd outgrow. Instead of fighting me, Christopher suggested we take a weekend trip to the science center. Sophie loved the interactive displays there. That willingness to listen and change direction was worth more than any gift. DNA results 3 days later. A courier delivered the DNA results in an official envelope with lab seals and legal stamps. Christopher came over that night. We reviewed pages of genetic markers and probability percentages on my couch, confirming what we already knew. Sophie wandered in from her room where she'd been coloring, sat on the couch between us. Christopher told her he was her daddy, that he'd been looking for us for a long time. He didn't know about her before, but now he did and wanted to be part of her life. Sophie considered this silently, her face serious, like kids get when trying to understand something big. She asked if she had Swiss grandparents, like her friend Emma had grandparents in California. We said yes, that her whole family wanted to meet her when she was ready, but only when she felt comfortable. She nodded and went back to coloring, maybe needing time to process. Getting professional help the next morning. Jennifer recommended a child therapist named Dr. Patricia Edwards. She specialized in helping kids through major family transitions. We scheduled an intake appointment for the following week, giving Sophie time to process without interference. Jennifer said professional support didn't mean failure. It meant protecting Sophie from adult problems overwhelming her. Learning to ask for help didn't make me weak. It meant I was smart enough to recognize when we needed guidance. Media attention that afternoon at work. My phone rang with an unfamiliar local area code. Someone asking me to call back about a story circulating online. When the reporter said she'd heard about Christopher's daughter and wanted to verify details before publishing, my palms started sweating. I panicked and called Jennifer from the restaurant bathroom. She told me to implement the privacy strategy we'd discussed. No media contact. Let the story die from lack of information. We decided silence was our defense. Mom's letter 2 days later. A large envelope appeared in my mailbox. My mother's handwriting. A 5-page letter. She apologized for her mistakes, but also listed all the places she wanted to take Sophie. Suggested we plan a family trip to Switzerland. She talked about missing us and how families should forgive. But every sentence had strings attached. Demands that I forget 4 years of abandonment. She was trying to get back in by pretending everything was forgiven, like we were a happy family again. Her goal was accessing Sophie and Christopher's world without proving herself. I put the letter in my documents folder with everything else. Therapy for Sophie the following Tuesday. I met Dr. Patricia Edwards at her office while Christopher waited in the lobby. She asked questions about Sophie's routine, personality, how she'd handled changes before, and what scared me most about this transition. Christopher joined us, and we discussed everything from both perspectives while Dr. Edwards took notes. After an hour, she brought Sophie in for a calm, age-appropriate session with toys and art supplies. Dr. Edwards asked Sophie about her family and feelings while she drew and played with miniature dolls. At the end, Dr. Edwards said we should keep Sophie's routine stable, introduce changes gradually, give her control over relationship building. She gave us scripts for talking about difficult topics and checking in with Sophie without interrogating her. Amanda's difficult position, Amanda called that night, asked if I'd consider supervised, limited contact with our mother to prevent her from filing for grandparents' rights out of spite. I stared at my phone, torn between protecting Amanda and knowing my mother hadn't earned access to Sophie yet. I wanted to ease my sister's burden after years of secretly helping us. But another part realized that giving in to manipulation to avoid conflict was how my mother had controlled everyone for decades. I told Amanda I needed to think and consult my lawyer. Understanding grandparents' rights the next morning, Jennifer showed me the state's grandparents' petition laws. My mother had virtually no standing to claim visitation without an established relationship. She suggested mediation, first as a good faith gesture, would create legal documentation if my mother proved unreasonable. We could show a court we tried to resolve things, and my mother was the obstacle. I agreed to mediation if strict rules were outlined about contact and boundaries. More media attention that afternoon. The reporter left another note on my apartment door. This one offering to meet off the record to hear my side before others twisted the narrative. I clutched the paper, tempted to correct the record and control the story. Then I remembered Jennifer's advice. Engaging gave the story fuel and attention. Silence was the fastest way to make it uninteresting. I shredded the note and threw it away. Sophie's therapy session at Sophie's second therapy appointment the following week. Dr. Edwards had her draw her family and feelings. Sophie drew herself in the middle with a thought bubble full of question marks over her head. When Dr. Edwards gently asked what worried her, Sophie said she was scared her daddy would leave again like before, even though she knew he didn't know about her. We addressed her fear by naming it instead of pretending everything was fine. Creating a visual schedule, Christopher brought a large craft store bag that weekend. We sat at the kitchen table with Sophie. He pulled out a blank monthly calendar with large daily squares and 2 sheets of stickers. Airplanes, video cameras, hearts, and stars. Sophie gasped and grabbed for the stickers. Christopher explained we were making a chart showing when he'd visit and when they'd video call. I watched her carefully pick purple hearts for video call days and gold stars for in-person visits. Christopher pointed to each spot and let her place stickers counting the days between visits. She stuck them slightly crooked and overlapping, but she was so serious about it. When we finished, she wanted to hang it in her room immediately. We tacked it to the wall beside her bed so she could see it every morning. She loved it and asked for more stickers for birthdays and special occasions. Christopher agreed and gave her the full sheet. Watching them plan together relaxed something tight in my chest. Photo sharing concerns 3 days later. Christopher called while I was doing laundry. Asked if his parents could have some photos of Sophie for their family album. I dropped the shirt I was folding as my body tensed. I told him I needed to think about it. We could discuss it later. After we hung up, my protective walls slammed back into place. Thinking about strangers across the ocean, seeing pictures of my baby. That night, Jennifer helped me understand some photo sharing was reasonable, but we could set strict rules. The next day, I told Christopher he could have 3 photos that I would choose, with a signed agreement that nothing went on social media and the photos stayed with his immediate family. He agreed without hesitation, thanked me for trusting him enough to share. I picked 3 recent photos: Sophie reading, playing at the park, and smiling at the camera. Sending them felt like giving away pieces of her I couldn't protect. But I did it because Christopher had earned trust. Mom's Facebook campaign, Amanda, called me 5 times the next morning. I called her back, and she told me to check Mom's Facebook immediately. My stomach turned as I opened the app. A new album titled My Precious Girls with 20 childhood photos of Amanda and me. Captions about happy memories, strong family bonds, and her beautiful daughters. I barely remembered most of these. Birthday and holiday photos. All from before I got pregnant. Nothing from the last 4 years because she wasn't there. Dozens of relatives commented about how wonderful the memories were and what a great mother she must be. Reading her rewrite history for people who didn't know the truth made me sick. Amanda had screenshotted everything and sent it to me for documentation. She wanted me to record Mom's behavior in case it mattered later. I saved everything to an evidence folder on my phone. Tried to use anger instead of falling into old self-doubt. Planning mediation that afternoon, Jennifer called. She'd arranged mediation with a family conflict specialist named Victoria Clark. The terms were strict. My mother had to apologize for each action without excuses, commit to starting therapy within a week, agree in writing that any contact with Sophie was my decision with no timeline. Jennifer said my mother's lawyer had reviewed the terms and she'd agreed to attend. I was surprised she'd accepted such harsh restrictions. But Jennifer reminded me my mother probably assumed she could charm her way through mediation and get what she wanted. We'd see if she actually followed through or if it was more manipulation. Harassment at work 2 nights later. I worked the dinner shift at the restaurant. Everything was fine until table 12. A Thursday regular sat down. I took his order as usual. When I brought his food, he grinned at me and said loudly enough for surrounding tables to hear that I'd found myself a rich Swiss guy. Was I sure I hadn't trapped him on purpose? My face burned as I froze with the plate in my hand. I carefully set the plate down, asked him firmly but politely to stop because that was completely inappropriate. He laughed like it was a joke, but my manager heard from across the room. She walked over and politely but firmly told him to pay his check and leave. Said the restaurant didn't tolerate customer harassment. He tried to argue. She wouldn't let him. Just repeated that he needed to go. He threw cash on the table and stormed out while other customers watched. My manager squeezed my shoulder, told me to take a 5-minute break in the back. I stood in the kitchen, shaking with anger and relief that someone had my back. Formalizing the parenting plan the following Monday, Christopher and I met at Jennifer's office with our lawyers. She'd prepared a temporary parenting plan in meticulous detail. Christopher would visit every other weekend for 6 hours on Saturday and Wednesday night video calls. Structured, documented financial support. We had to agree together on Sophie's education, healthcare, and major activities. Everything was formal with signatures and witness lines. Christopher and I signed our names on multiple copies, sitting across from each other at the conference table. It felt safer documenting everything in legal language than just trusting verbal agreements. The framework protected Sophie most, prevented us from making sudden changes without proper procedure. Jennifer filed the plan with the court that afternoon, making it official. The mediation session Victoria Clark's downtown office hosted the mediation on a gray Thursday morning. My mother arrived on time, dressed nicely, carrying tissues in her purse. Victoria sat between us and explained the ground rules before we started. My mother cried immediately, said she'd made a terrible mistake. She was young and scared when I got pregnant, but then she started justifying it, saying she was teaching me responsibility. That tough love was necessary. My heart was racing, but I stayed calm and interrupted her. I told her I needed her to acknowledge what she'd done without excuses. I listed everything, asked her to confirm she remembered kicking me out with 2 hours' notice, changing the locks, refusing all contact for 4 years, telling relatives I was dead. She cried more, but kept trying to explain her reasons. Victoria stopped her, explained the exercise required acknowledgement without justification. My mother wanted to defend herself, but Victoria said she needed to write everything down as homework instead. Victoria scheduled our next check-in for 2 weeks later to review the written acknowledgement. Processing the mediation the next day, Dr. Edwards and I discussed the mediation session. She reviewed Victoria's notes carefully, asked how I felt hearing my mother cry. I told her it was harder than I'd imagined, but I was glad I demanded accountability. Dr. Edwards helped me think about whether Sophie could safely have supervised contact eventually. She emphasized my mother had to demonstrate consistent change, not just apologize and demand access. Together, we set clear criteria. 6 months of weekly therapy with attendance verification. Written accountability for her actions without excuses or explanations. No pushback or manipulation when I set boundaries. We'd only consider a supervised meeting between her and Sophie if she consistently met all three standards. I liked the timeline because it let my mother work to earn trust while protecting Sophie from someone who was essentially a stranger. The article, a local online news site, published the reporter's article Saturday morning. I forced myself to read it over coffee, expecting the worst. It was actually respectful. Prioritized privacy, rights for complicated families. After the reporter fact-checked everything, and I refused to comment, most of it was speculation about legal boundaries that faded into background noise within 2 days. It wasn't tabloid drama, which relieved me. Some co-workers saw it, but nobody asked questions. Amanda sets boundaries, Amanda texted that afternoon. Said mom had been texting her all morning, complaining that I was keeping her grandchild from her, begging Amanda to talk to me on her behalf. This time, Amanda didn't relay mom's complaints or try to mediate. She told me she'd informed mom to work with the mediator and stopped using her as a go-between. She said she was tired of being stuck in the middle, that mom needed to earn our trust through her actions. I texted back thanking her and praising her for setting that boundary. Amanda was finding her voice instead of just pleasing everyone. Negotiating visit length the next morning. I made Sophie breakfast. Christopher called asking if we could meet at the park near my apartment to discuss his schedule. We sat on a bench while Sophie played on the swings, 20 feet away where I could watch her. He showed me his phone calendar. Suggested staying for a week instead of 3 days. Next visit. Said his family wanted more time with Sophie, and he could work remotely from the hotel. I tensed immediately. Told him the therapist said gradual increments were best for Sophie. Jumping from 3 to 7 days was too fast. He looked frustrated, ran his hand through his hair, argued she seemed fine. I stopped him, pointed out that she seemed okay, so we shouldn't push harder. Kids often showed stress in unexpected ways later. He sat quietly, watching Sophie pump her legs on the swing, then nodded and said he understood, even though leaving was hard when things were going well. I appreciated that he listened instead of arguing, that he slowed down even though it went against what he wanted. We agreed to keep it 3 days this time and add 1 day next month if Sophie adjusted well. It felt like we were learning to work together instead of just sacrificing to keep the peace. Mom's therapy progress Victoria Clark emailed me 3 days later with an attachment. My mother's first therapy intake appointment. A licensed therapist had signed documentation confirming the session date and time. A treatment plan outlined weekly visits. I stared at the document for a long time, hopeful but mostly suspicious. One appointment didn't erase 4 years of abandonment or decades of controlling, conditional behavior. Victoria's email was professional and neutral, acknowledged progress without overstating it, reminded me lasting change takes months, not weeks. This was just step 1. I added the email to my mediation documents folder, adding to the growing pile of evidence documenting everything. Returning to the old neighborhood that afternoon, I drove to my old neighborhood for the first time since moving. Parked outside the studio apartment where Sophie and I had lived for 3 years. The front door paint was still peeling. The parking lot still had oily puddles. The memories pressed down on me as I sat with the engine running. The mildew smell that wouldn't go away no matter how much bleach I used. Sophie crying from hunger while I waited for my paycheck to buy formula. Walking 4 miles to work in the dark because the bus didn't run early enough for my shift. Counting pennies to figure out if I had enough for the laundromat or another week of dirty clothes. The constant worry and mental math of which bill to skip so we could eat. I gripped the steering wheel and remembered why I was careful, why I doubted everything, built safety nets, and took time before trusting people. That wasn't paranoia or being difficult. That was learned from surviving without help. Those instincts had kept Sophie and me alive when we had nothing. I pulled away from the building after 10 minutes, drove home to our safe, roach-free apartment, grateful and also frustrated by how hard this all was. Sophie's confusion, Sophie cried into her pillow that night. said she was confused about everything. I sat on the edge of her bed, asked what was confusing her. She asked why she had to go to Christopher's hotel instead of him always coming to our place. It was weird having two locations and not knowing which one was home. Watching her struggle to understand something so complicated at her age hurt my chest. I grabbed her favorite stuffed rabbit from the shelf, told her we'd make a routine for going between places. We practiced right there in her room. The rabbit went in her little backpack first. We sang the ABCs while she put on her shoes. 3 hugs from me and 3 kisses before she left. We'd do everything in reverse when she came home. She stopped crying, made me practice it 5 times until she had it memorized. By the end, she was giggling when I pretended to forget the letter after M. I tucked her in and promised we'd do the routine every single time, to make her feel safe no matter where we were. Mediation Follow-up Victoria Clark's office hosted the follow-up mediation on Tuesday morning. My mother arrived 10 minutes early, sat in the waiting area with a folder on her lap. Victoria called us back in. We sat in the same seats, same distance apart. My mother pulled 3 handwritten pages from her folder. Victoria asked her to read them aloud. My mother's voice shook as she read the list of her actions. Kicking me out with 2 hours' notice when I was 18 and pregnant, changing the locks so I couldn't come back, ignoring Amanda's pleas for help, letting me go to a shelter, telling the family I'd become a stripper instead of admitting I was homeless, never coming to the hospital when Sophie was born, even after Amanda told her, living 25 minutes away for 4 years without checking on us. The list covered 2 pages. Reading it made her cry, but she didn't apologize or explain while reading, just listed everything. When she finished, she looked at me and apologized for each mistake without trying to justify any of it. I could see she still wanted to defend herself, but this was more honest than any previous apology. I sat there, letting the words sink in, didn't try to comfort her or tell her everything was okay. I told her this was a first step, not absolution, that she needed to keep proving herself through actions, not just words. After a long silence, Victoria took notes and scheduled our next check-in for a month later. Work schedule changes the next day. My restaurant manager and I met at lunch. I explained I needed to adjust my schedule to be home for Sophie's bedtime routine on nights Christopher wasn't visiting. We looked at the staff calendar on his iPad together. Instead of 2 evening shifts per week, I'd work busy lunch shifts. Lunch actually paid better because of higher table turnover and more consistent business lunch tips. He gave me first choice on the calendar after 3 years of reliability. Said he'd rather work with me than lose me to another restaurant. I thanked him, feeling relief wash over me that things were coming together. Slowly adding these logistical pieces made everything feel more solid, less like it might collapse at any moment. School communication planned Christopher, and I spent 2 hours at a coffee shop writing Sophie's school statement. We kept it straightforward. Sophie's father had been located after a long search. We were starting co-parenting. Both parents requested that questions and concerns be addressed privately rather than discussed with other parents or staff. We wanted Sophie supported without being judged or gossiped about. The principal called me that afternoon after Christopher sent it. She thanked us for being proactive, promised to brief Sophie's teacher and front office staff discreetly. They'd update pickup authorization in the system and direct questions to us. She said they'd watch for any struggles Sophie might have and notify us immediately. I hung up feeling like we'd saved her from some unnecessary drama. Supervised visit approval Dr. Edwards called Friday afternoon. Said she'd reviewed all the mediation paperwork and my mother's therapy documentation. She felt comfortable approving one brief, supervised meeting between my mother and me before involving Sophie. The mediation office would host it with Victoria Clark present. Safe, neutral environment. Sophie wouldn't be affected if things went wrong because she wouldn't know about it. If everything went well, we could discuss next steps. We scheduled the meeting for Thursday. I agreed, then spent the next week anxious. I practiced what I wanted to say, wrote things down, and crossed them out, preparing for a conversation I didn't know how to have. The supervised meeting was harder than I'd imagined. I sat across from my mother in Victoria Clark's office, tissues on the table between us. Victoria explained the rules. Had my mother read her written apologies again? This version was longer than what she'd read at mediation. It detailed all 4 years. She described specific times she denied help, lied to relatives, put her pride before my survival. She talked about getting Amanda's call that I'd given birth alone and choosing not to go to the hospital. About seeing Sophie's picture for the first time 2 years later and feeling nothing because she thought I deserved my struggles. Her voice cracked several times, but she kept reading. When she finished, she put the papers down and cried. Didn't defend herself. Just sat there and let the words stand.